every year, every month, every quarter, every season that comes along, any little opportunity for you just to put little things in place that were not there before just keeps aggregating up every year as you keep going through it. Every time something changes, the impact will be far less on you.
Sports science, strength and conditioning, high performance coaching. Welcome to the Decoding Excellence Show. Today's episode is brought to you by VOD Performance, the makers of the Nordboard. If you haven't checked out their website yet, I highly suggest you head over there, whether it's return to play, injury prevention, or just plain performance testing. VOD Performance has the tools that you need. Check them out at vodperformance.com. Today on the show, I'm joined with sleep coach and author Nick Littlehales. Nick is a world-class sleep coach to some of the biggest names in professional sports. Teams include British Cycling, Team Sky's record-breaking cyclists, top premiership and international football teams and players, rugby union and rugby league, and last and not least, Olympic and Paralympic athletes. In addition to counseling many of the world's best athletes, Nick is also the author of Sleep, The Myth of 8 Hours, The Power of Naps, and the New Plan to Recharge Your Body and Mind. A handbook, an applied guide to helping athletes and students and all people sleep better and more restfully. This is a monster of an episode and one you don't want to miss if you're trying to improve the abilities of your athletes to recover, to regenerate, and recharge between workouts, fixtures, and bouts. We discuss everything from the R90 Sleep Method, some of the simple and easy tips that people can immediately improve their sleep if they adopt, and just the importance of sleep and the circadian rhythms and understanding what your sleep chronotype is in determining the best times for you to go to bed. If you have any interest in making your athletes perform better, helping them to achieve greater performance excellence, and allowing them the opportunity to recover more efficiently in between training bouts, this is a show you cannot miss. So without further ado, here is my conversation with sleep coach and author, Nick Littlehales. Nick, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you. It's a great honor to be talking to you and all your listeners, and really look forward to it.
Yeah, look, I've been a big fan of yours. I say fan that you've posted via Twitter, and obviously the book that you've wrote, Sleep, The Myth of 8 Hours, The Power of Naps, which has been something that I've shared with our coaching staff here, some of the materials I've shared with our student athletes, but it's just I am humbled to get you online today. So thank you so much for agreeing to come on the Decoding Excellence show. How are things?
Things are great. We're just trying to react because we've just shifted daylight saving time clocks 1 hour forward over the weekend, which always causes a little bit of disruption in sport and in the general population, because we're now into full-on summer and the daylight's there right into the early, late evenings. So all our habits change and everything else. So we're just enjoying that at the moment. But I'm very well, but extremely busy.
Yeah, I can relate certainly on that aspect. And having us gone through our own sort of shifting of times, just the implications that can have on performance. And, when you spring forward and lose an hour of sleep, wow, it's designed maybe socioeconomically, but the unintended consequences of that manifest itself in performance and fatigue and readiness. It's crazy. Yes.
I think when you start to look at sleep, I think we mentioned it a little bit earlier on. It's always been one of these natural performance enhancers, but because we just take it for granted over the years, people have just got away with it. So it's a very popular subject at the moment. I think there's a lot of people trying to jump into this window to make some money, particularly on the tech side and things like that. But it's very much what's outlined in that book, Alan. It's more of an educational process that's got to start with everybody. to open up their minds to what this whole mental and physical recovery period is all about and how to maximize its benefits. But we are literally going back to school, first class and parenting to try and get a better handle on this. You certainly can't just jump into it and become a superstar on sleep.
No, by all means, and that's essentially the show for today and what we're going to discuss. And I think there's no other person better than you to bring on the show and discuss some of the commonalities between excellent performers that take their sleep serious to some of the simple solutions that people can do to optimize their sleep and their recovery. And you've outlined, a number of different strategies that I know we'll get into a little bit later in the show from a technical standpoint. But for the audience members that might not follow you on Twitter or might not be exposed to your book, can you give them just a brief update of what you're currently up to and how you found yourself in a position to write otherwise this book and provide these strategies to optimize people's sleep?
Right, a little story of how I got here. I think I've been involved with the industry for a long, long time. It's up to 30 years now, and I sort of fell into it. I was trying to be, like a lot of young teenagers, become a professional athlete in any sport I could get my hands on. So I'd already had a relationship with it, but I fell into the world of sleep working for a very big company. I rattled through their ranks to become their international sales and marketing director at 32 years of age. And it was involved with the sleep industry. And because it was an international company, I wandered around the world looking at all the various different sleeping habits and products and environments. I worked on the clinical side with some professors and also founded the UK Sleep Council and was chairman of that for a while. And my UK office was in Oldham, Manchester, and maybe a little bit of a midlife crisis sort of point. But I sat there and thought, all the information and experience that I've gathered, at the end of the day, it's having very little effect, if at all, on the population as a whole. So one or two things happened which sparked me off to write to the local football club, which happened to be Manchester United. I mean, the optimum word there is right, Adam. We didn't text or email in those days, late 90s. And I wondered if sport had something going on that I could tap into and translate that back into my world as a sales and marketing director. And it started a conversation off with the club. And I think where we sit today with all our data analysis and technology and insights into human performance, that was a very different world back in late 98. Sports science and data collection and how particularly football in the UK, which would have been probably, of a similar nature to maybe NFL or NBA, as sport had a lot of things that are available to them now, which was not there. So it's the open-mindedness of the manager, Alex Ferguson, to maybe what's coming in the future and to have a conversation about sleep and sleeping products. And from that particular point, I decided to leave my business, to leave my job as a director and move on and do something else. So I was working out a contract, and this happened during that period of time. So my company just let me get on with this. So I had some dialogue. I worked with one of the players on a product side with lower back issues. So the first sort of sleep coaching I did was about postural care rather than sleep itself, because they were debilitating through the hours of sleep, not protecting the back. It was making it worse because they got the wrong products and didn't know the correct sleeping positions and things like that. So we did that. That sort of opened up dialogue to maybe look at other things. And so I started to engage with the club, and the media, being the media, sort of found out that I was, Manchester United's got a sleep coach, because that's how they put it together. They were somebody's talking to them about sleep, and obviously it must be a coach. They wouldn't say doctor. So the title arrived. I wasn't actually being a sleep coach. I was just talking to players and physios and doctors and the manager, and realizing that they knew absolutely nothing in this area. And so that's why they became interested, not because I could improve what they were already doing. They were doing nothing. So it was kind of weird to then start saying, well, come on, Nick, will you talk to the players? Will you do things with the players? So I had to start manufacturing what this job was about. And, to shorten the story down a little bit, the players within Manchester United, you had a very high-profile period of time when they won the trebles. So they won 3 competitions, the final one beating Bayern Munich in one of the finals in a very dramatic way. So there was a lot of emphasis around the team. And from that particular point, a lot of those players played for the England national squad. So they started to pass on their experiences to the England national squad. That triggered off conversations within that organisation to have conversations with me. That led to other clubs being intrigued about what Manchester United or the England squad might be doing in this area. Like, we all like a bit of referral, don't we? I wonder what they're doing over there, so maybe we can try it. So it was kind of elite sport in the very case, because it was simply a set of circumstances. It just happened to be an elite football club around the world, Manchester United. You then had the elite nature of English football and the England squad. And then what followed there was Arsenal and Liverpool and Chelsea. We're all sort of tapping in to try and find out what I was up to. And we put the very first recovery room into Manchester United's training ground, which was when they were starting to double up training. Now, this was late 98, 2000. So this was a long time ago, Adam. And people talk about sleep pods and recovery rooms in corporate and in sport and all sorts of things now. But back then, I was wandering around as if I was crazy. But it was there was certain people who really had an insight and probably said there must be something here, because it's a hell of a lot of time that we allocate every day, and we principally go, get upstairs, get yourself some good sleep, and we'll see you in the morning, and we're going to go again. And that was going on then, and I could safely say it's still going on now, Adam. There's in some areas there hasn't been that dramatic shift to try and raise awareness and education. And I suppose the period of time that maybe started to elevate this area was when I started working with British Cycling and Team Sky, and they had a particular strategy to go from A to B, to win Tour de France's, to win gold medals on track and road, male and female and Paralympic. And they were starting from scratch. So they developed a strategy called the aggregation of marginal gains. That meant for the very first time an organization would look into not only how you wash your hands, but also maybe sleep. Why wouldn't we cover that off if it's an aggregation of marginal gains? So when I got involved with them, I was able to encapsulate my experience and my from working with individual athletes and teams and my own experience of the industry, is to put all that together and to become a proper sleep coach with an actual technique, which is called recovery in 90-minute cycles. So the R90 technique, to identify the 7 key areas of sleep recovery, which I felt that you have to get people to this point before you start doing anything else. So the key 7 areas that you look into with any individual or group, get those right, and then you can move on to stage 2. So I developed that. And then the success of British Cycling and Team Sky culminated at the London 2012 Olympics. That, for the first time, had top coaches actually talking on TV about sleep and its effect on these marginal gains and its effect on performance and more sustainable levels of recovery. They had the performance factors to back that up. So I was part of the whole process. And that really led on to people like Michael Johnson, your very famous sprinter, and also a highly esteemed trainer in human performance. I was involved with programs with him about what's making the difference, the game changers. And it's really strange because we were talking about sleep. And for the first time, they were actually talking about it in a very positive way, in a very sort of proactive way. And that's been going on over these years up until, we had the same impact on Rio 2016 with these teams. We're already planning for the Winter Olympics in Korea, and we're already planning for Tokyo in 2020. And there's all these complexities that come across, and it's really great to be involved in this world. I think the one little thing to sort of end that story is that, yes, there are some significant performance factors, and you've recorded reading the book, it's sort of opened your mind, but they are very simple and practical and achievable things, aren't they, Adam? We're not talking about you have to run out the door and go and buy yourself a £15,000 new bike to achieve these things. They're very easily achievable. And when the lot of the work that I'm doing now to encapsulate this story is, it's high on the agenda for two reasons. Why? There are some very serious health and well-being red flags around at this moment in time. And it's a consequence of shifting from the mid-late 90s, where we got away with it, to a world that we live in now that's only going to get more intense and more demanding. And this is why we're not coping with this now. We're actually being driven with schedules, with performance levels at an early age through mid-20s. And we're really starting to see quite a lot of red flags. And these are basically things like type 2 diabetes, weight control. You don't have to be fat and obese to be worried about weight control. There's lots of people in sport who have to control their weight, and it becomes more difficult. There are things like a lot of anxiety, depression, even getting across to more suicidal thoughts. You've got almost epidemic is a word that I don't use it, but other people do, with getting addicted to supplements, little pouches that go under your lip called snus, to caffeine off the charts, and to things like sleeping tablets. You're not sleeping well, so what do? Take some tablets. And those things used to have to be prescribed, but quite a lot of them you don't need prescription, you just get online. So once you've actually accessed a sleeping tablet drug, because it was prescribed to you, you then just buy it in quantities online. So there's been a lot of changes, and a lot of those dynamics means I'm not actually talking about sleep in the book or in my job. I'm talking about mental and physical recovery versus mental and physical activity. How do you get a roadmap for an individual to get from A to B, and try and do it in a redefined way? Because, as you pointed out, the myth of 8 hours, I've never come across anybody who gets 8 hours in one block without any disturbances 365 days of the year.
There's so many good things that you talked about in there, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't share that I am going through the monster of Alex Ferguson's autobiography right now. And what I found that parallels at least some of what is wrote in it so far is that same sort of approach that when I read Legacy and the sort of the aggregate of marginal gains in the chapters as they're dissecting literally every facet of performance and the smallest little marginal gain, and how we can improve just 1% of everything to make a much larger sort of aggregate of those gains into something that's substantial. And that is, and I know that's by no means seems maybe revolutionary in what our decade here, but to hear that, you're instrumental in this with the British Cycling and Team Sky and this work being done in the 90s, like to discuss sleep.
It's scary,
it's scary. I think of sort of Overton's window in that, people probably thought you were a lunatic back then, but now you're accepted and realize that this is just as instrumental of a part of sport preparation as your technical, tactical skill coaches, as your fitness coaches. We have regeneration specialists, and now obviously with the advent of elite sport sleep coaches like yourself.
Yeah, and I think, when you use the word lunatic, you're not far off, because it was a subject that would have never cropped up. It was never thought about. And for somebody to actually be opening up those conversations at an elite sport level, not down in schools or education, but being laughed out of every meeting. But there's always somebody who looks at it and says, well, there's a lot of good information. I don't know what to do with it at this moment in time, or whether it will benefit me, but I'm prepared to come and walk along this route with you. So there were certain players like Ryan Giggs, who was a very famous Manchester United player and played on way into his 40s. And so there was always Alex Ferguson, Ryan Giggs, there was the physio at Arsenal Football Club, Gary Lewin, Rob Swire, the physio at Manchester United latterly. Arsene Wenger, the manager of Arsenal, was an open-minded manager to this and wanted to start looking at better things. So it's sort of, but at that time, the clinical world, all the great universities around the world who've been researching sleep and continually producing evidence of how important it is, but had absolutely no impact on us as a population. So why would I be able to have an impact when the big universities and clinics around the world had not been able to do it? They'd never spoken to them. They don't even go there because they don't know how to impact on our lives. So, yeah, we're sort of enjoying where it is right now. But I can tell you what, for anybody who gets told by mentors or, Alex Ferguson's book, which is now about leadership and business, we get all these little, how long do you keep doing something without reward before you stop it? When's the right time to pack it in? Are you just doing something at a particular point that just simply hasn't matured yet? Or are you a lunatic trying to make something work that will not work? So whether in business or anything, or whether you're a young athlete, if you're trying to be Usain Bolt and you're only 3 foot tall and you weigh 20 stone, you're going to struggle. So I'd change your mindset, because that's not going to happen. So lunatic is a pretty good way to describe what I've been doing for the last 18 years. Up until now, talking to you, Adam, it makes sense.
Yeah, I just think of, I draw parallels to our sport culture in sort of the early infancy of clinical sports psychologists coming on the scene, and to the sort of the adverse thoughts of, what could this person possibly provide for me? I'm an athlete, but to actually consider the circumstances of using a tool like psychology to impact sport performance. And it's the same way with some of the work that you're doing as far as optimizing athletes' sleep to help performance. And I think, we all go through this evolution of being sort of viewed as an outsider, or viewing as, this is radical, to eventually being accepted and part of the normal culture.
It's a very good point, because what happens, right up until very, very recently, the sort of tech wearable app type world that was giving us data about our performance, like heart rate and things like that, while we're exercising, being healthy, or just day-to-day steps we're taking. So we've got that information. Then we take some of that data and translate it into how we sleep. So suddenly, we've never tracked sleep. We've never looked at it. We don't know anything about it. And then suddenly we're getting data coming off our wearables or apps telling us about deep sleep and how long we've slept for and disturbances and all sorts of stuff. But that's like, walking into a school and talking a foreign language. Yeah. It's like, what do I do with this information?
Yeah.
How do I change what's going on? How do I even know? Do I want 6.25 hours sleep or 7.25 hours sleep? And I sort of go, well, I work with a single-handed round-the-world sailor, and at sea for months on their own in a stripped-out boat with just a chair to sleep in, surrounded by sensors. And the sleep-wake cycle approach we take is about 20 to 26 minutes every 6 hours if they're lucky. So how do you know what you're doing with this information? And so many organizations have sort of gone, okay, possibly, what's the content in the book is very simple but provocative, isn't it, Adam? And you go, well, can't we tech that? Can't we measure these results? And I said, to be honest with you, if you just get anybody to just raise their awareness of the circadian rhythms of the day, step one, that reminds us that we're human beings, not tech robots. We understand their chronotype, which is their sleep characteristic, and we combine the two together. Then we think about sleeping in cycles rather than hours, because that's perfectly natural to us as human beings. It's just the process that we've introduced has changed this without thought. And you go along these little steps, then you suddenly realize that turning around to a young group of athletes who were probably only just about born in the late 90s, if at all, and telling them to shut their tech down half an hour before they go to sleep, which will mean that they will sleep better, is absolute rubbish. They have to have an understanding of their relationship with blue light, how much they're getting, and particularly now here in the UK and you a couple of weeks ago, when you shift that daylight saving time, and suddenly when I'm going home at 5 or 6 o'clock at night, the sun's out, and it's going to be out until the late evening. So I need to understand these things.
Yeah.
Not in a really scientific way, but if I don't, I crash and burn. And I start doing, I shut my tech down, that'll solve my sleep problem. No, it won't.
Yeah.
No, it won't. And it's not to take them back to a world that they don't know anything about, where there was no phones, no this, no that, no 24 hours. Okay, that world's gone. But it wasn't that long ago, which is the point. It wasn't 100 years ago. It was actually in many cases, just 1 decade ago, where I had nothing compared to what I've got now. I'm talking to you on Skype. You're in the US, I'm in Nottingham. We're not even being charged for the call, and I can actually see you and talk to you. Now, that's like saying, how unbelievable is that? And I think we just take things so for granted. And I might sound like some old geezer who's out of touch, but you do have to realize this is like in 1 decade. We've just completely used this wonderful stuff to just recreate a world that we're now going, wow. And suddenly, and a good example, I think, for all is stop telling the younger generation or coaching the younger generation, trying to pick on certain things that might be the cause of it. The reason why they find it more difficult to sleep at night is because schedules of the world of sport, we have the times the games are played, the times the games they've finished. We bring in all the media, which adds more hours to the whole game. We've got more intensity of how many games are being played. We've got more traveling. We've got more this. And the athlete's family has got the same dynamics going on in their world. So when you look at a profile of an individual as an elite athlete, it is completely different to the one that's here today, but it's the same human being. End of story.
I think it's such a multifactorial challenge that we have, and it can't be isolated to the advent of commercial cell phones or technology for any things. And I just love the fact in your book that it wasn't tech centric, right? It's almost wrote to change behaviors, not have more technological dependency, if you will. So when you wrote it, and you said simple, but what I think, if I were to replace the word, simple strategies with efficient or, with concise, it changes the narrative a little bit. And that's what I loved as I was reading it, is that it was practical. It was applied. It's not just in theory, in clinical settings, in the hospitals, in the research lab. And I think one of the reasons, if I were to draw maybe some success, or at least sort of retrospectively look back, is that you had success likely because you applied a sort of translational approach of taking what was being conducted in the labs, but actually applying it to humans in the field, which is sometimes lost on a clinical side of things.
It is. It's a very good point, and I think, as you know, whenever we sit down and take an exam, or we write something, or we say something, or we act in a particular way, whatever it is, we're always a little bit concerned about how others might perceive us or react to us. So when you're sort of writing about, you know, your story and what you believe in and what you've experienced, you know, every now and again I just like to make it more clinical, more academic, more professional, because I knew that Adam would be reading it, or a doctor, or a leading professor in a university, or a leading coach in the NFL, or something like that. And you sort of think, well, how will they perceive this if I don't make it a little bit more, you know, technical, clinical, step by step kind of practice? But I was constantly reminded by the people around me in doing it that the reality is you're talking to these people on a day-to-day basis right now, and why they're working with you is because of that approach. So you can't change it, you can't elevate it, you don't want to tech orientate it. That's the way it is. So by default, anybody else who reads it would naturally respond, like all the people you work with anyway, that this is the first step you need to take in any organization before you even think about trying to measure it, trying to develop what could be achieved, if the level of knowledge and awareness is absolutely zero. And I know, you know, and it's even happening today. It'll happen tomorrow. I will be coaching, you know, a university in the US because of their graduate surgeon program. I've been working with grammar schools because the schools and the education, the hospitals are getting on, the air traffic controllers are getting on, the pilots are getting on. And I tell you what, I'm having a conversation with long-haul pilots and short-haul pilots as a sleep coach, and realizing that I had some impressions in my head about what this part of my life, you know, there's certain people in our world that we really want to trust and we admire, and hopefully they're doing everying they possibly can. I was
just going to say surgeons, yes, as well.
And that's one of them, isn't it? Surgeons and pilots. And I tell you what, you know, when you look at maybe an 80-hour week for surgeons and doctors, nurses, you know, was all right in the 90s, just about, maybe. It was tough. It was tough, but you just about got away with it. But you shift that 80-hour week into this world, no chance. If you take a pilot doing long haul, and then you sort of, you're in conversations where if you put another 50% pilots on at work at tomorrow, we'd still be struggling. And you go, wow. And that's not even looking forward to when we're going to have more flights and more this and more that. And I think, you know, in every single area, there has, even pilots get such little education and so little focus from what I gather talking to pilots. I haven't studied this, Adam, but talking to pilots, talking to me in a consultative way, I realize exactly what's going on. And so I think there's, you know, the reason why, as you pointed out, the book had to be kept at a level is because I've got doctors buying these books, GPs, practitioners buying these books and handing them out to their patients who are identifying with sleep problems on the increase. And so you've got students and young people getting hold of the book and reading it and being inspired by it. Well, if that was a clinical, academic, tech-orientated, don't do this, don't do that, it would have had no impact on anybody. So, you know, it's such an overwhelming experience because I've been in it for such a long time. And 18 years now is a long time, lots of ups and downs. it's such an overwhelming experience, even to be talking to you in this way about the subject sleep, and at a level which is almost, we've got to start from scratch.
You certainly, more so than I, have the sort of pre-internet technology sort of understanding of what the world was like a little bit more back then. And not that, pre-internet and pre-connectivity, global connectivity, it was the only challenge that negatively affected sleep by any means during those decades. But when I sit down and talk with our current student athletes, some of which are born 99, some of which are born in the 2000s, that grew up with connectivity, that grew up on a smartphone or with a screen in front of them and blue light exposure, and have the sort of day-to-day sort of instant gratification of, social streams and connectivity, and the way that can manifest in its sort of consciousness of constantly being aware and never discharging or setting the phone aside. That, I would love, and I know this might be a little bit of off track, but I would love to hear, in your experience, what were the biggest challenges when you sat down with an organization or an athlete, in your early part of your career, that we maybe don't have so much of a challenge now? And maybe to juxtapose that question, what's the greatest challenge nowadays that they didn't have in the 90s or late 80s?
It's probably a pretty standard answer is to how would I be able to have a conversation, never mind present, to engage an individual or a group into the subject of sleep? How would I be able to redefine so I can have a conversation with them? And you couldn't make things up, because if you make things up, then it's still not apparent. So I just looked at it and I thought, possibly what I should do is I should blame the generation that's above them, that they've let them down, because they knew that mental and physical recovery was going to be absolutely key. They knew that nobody was talking about in the schooling system or parents onto children and vice versa. So they've just let you wander straight into this world, and now they're shouting at you because you can't sleep and use this. I suppose way back then it was, so that's a little way I'm looking at it now, but way back then it was just the one thing in a clinical sense, you can track sleep on a polysomnograph in a clinic, tracking brainwave patterns, and you look at a 90-minute period, look at the next 90-minute period. Some would look at 60 minutes, but a lot in that profession would use 90 minutes. So I just thought, okay, the length of a football match in the UK, in the Premiership, is 90 minutes long. So if I use 90-minute cycles, so I can start to break down their schedules in 90-minute periods, and I can start to think in cycles rather than hours. I forget the word sleep, because that just describes something in their head that I'll never be able to get rid of. I'll think of mental and physical activity and mental and physical recovery, drop the word nap and call it a controlled recovery P, a CRP. I'm grabbing a 20-minute CRP to really, so I don't waste time sleeping. I try to look at it as if this, I wasn't, maybe that the ultimate goal for this human race and in the future would be to use more than 10% of our brains, to use technology and advancements to maybe get to a point where we can physically recover, which is probably the easy one, but mentally recover in a much shorter period of time, to embrace the fact that we could live for 70, 80 years on this planet, have a fantastic sporting, healthy lifestyle right up into our late 60s, early 70s. And all that time, we've just been sleeping an hour a day. That's all. And if we could achieve that, it's like, stop wasting valuable time to it. So all I had to do was give them the confidence that the last thing I was going to do was tell them to sleep for longer periods, to get to bed earlier, to sleep longer, to eat well, to exercise well, to do this, to that, because I knew that the conversation with pilots who are working rosters and shifts, with nurses and everybody who works shifts and work night shifts, they don't do it through the day. Everybody's got certain differences around the world, wherever you live, with temperatures and cultures and all sorts of stuff, that you just literally had to take something a little bit better. And that was a significant challenge, because not only were you trying to change the language of this natural everyday process, you were doing it with young people who are not so impressionable than the slightly more mature group. So they've got no fear. They can all sleep on a clothesline. They actually can bust 24 hours a day. They want to achieve, they want to go, they've got high energy, they're achievers, they just want to bust it and smash it and go for it. And that's the world they live in. So to actually try and get into their world was a major challenge. And it was about the language you're using rather than redefining it for them. So they started to go, wow, Nick, I'm on a 5-cycle routine. I've actually moved it down to a 4-cycle routine, so I'm saving myself 90 minutes a day, and I feel absolutely great. Next week, I'm going to try a 3-cycle routine. I'm just going to put 2 90-minute cycles back to back at night, so it frees up the whole night. I can get more done, takes the pressure off the events. Absolutely love it. Bang 1 90-minute cycle in before I go into training. And then when I get home, I'm just going to put a CRP in about 30 minutes, controlled like that, rather than falling asleep on the sofa. And then I'm going to get out there and do even more things. And I feel absolutely great. Things are just really going, injury times are coming down. I'm not wasting valuable time. I don't sleep before events anymore because it's a waste of time. I do these things, and they're just going, and it's absolutely brilliant. And I'm on it. And I really know just how much sleep I need now. And if I don't get as much, I don't worry about it. I've just stopped worrying about it, Nick. I just absolutely smash it. And so having somebody, did they mention sleep once? Did they mention I'm going to bed tonight and I'm going to sleep well tonight? No. They sort of like, there's so much more mentally in control of this process. And when you mentioned earlier about sports psychology, I think one of those areas is to change their mindset. And we all know that if you look at something scary, because the brain is continually processing what's in front of you. So if you stare long enough at something that's quite scary, and it's dark and it's sinister, and suddenly your heart rate will go up. You'll start to perspire. You feel fear. You feel uncomfortableness. If you change that image to a lovely river and the mountains and the sun and the flowers and the view, suddenly you become calm. You think of all those lovely things that have happened to you and are going to happen to you. And things just don't impact on you in the same way. And you feel relaxed, you feel chilled, non-anxious, non-stressed. So what you're trying to do is change the visualization in their heads with what sleep means to them. And once you get across that, then you can really start working with them. And that's where you see people really performing at their very highest levels in whatever sport they are. It's because you've changed the visualization of what that subject matter is in front of them, rather than giving them a piece of equipment or a tool or an intervention that makes them go quicker. Actually, they are now the real person. This is what their real personal best is, because it's been hidden by fatigue. And it's horrible. Fatigue comes on you over a very slow process. So you might think this is your personal best because you're smashing it. But actually, there's another one, the other side of the room, which you've lost sight of. And this change in visualization, this change of what this process can do for you, suddenly you just, I think as you've said it off air or before, is that suddenly you wake up in the morning and you start going, wow, I feel good. And then you start going, oh, I understand this, I understand that. So there's your performance factor, and you do not need to measure that, do you? Because you can see it. I think you mentioned about some people within your university have maybe engaged a little bit quicker than maybe others to this particular process. But I tell you what, the ones who are not grabbing onto this as quick as the others soon will, because they'll be 20 yards behind the others.
You said two things that really, really resonate. And I think it's both encapsulated in the writing that you did in your book, but more so just because it's, my first exposure to your spoken word. And you said it twice in this, both your last response and this response. And if you're aware of it, if you're unaware, it's so naturally in tune to it. But one of the brilliant things, and I say this for the audience of coaches that might be listening to this show, is that one of the brilliant things that you've done is you've changed the narrative. You changed the conversation from being what it won't be accepted within the demographic that is your audience, your pupils, if you will, the students that you're educating. You've changed the terminology from sleep, from napping, from this to, hey, we're grabbing a quick CRP. And I think that's brilliant from a coaching standpoint to better package the information, the education, and deliver it to the pupil otherwise. And I think that among two of your responses, while you didn't say it that way, that stuck out as a huge sort of a gem in this conversation.
It is, Adam, because it's like you're asking about redefining it for the individual, but you've also, without the rest of the framework, the rest of all the whether it's teachers and professors within the schooling environment, educational environment, within an organization, within a team, within the business world, within your own university schedule, if everybody's not getting engaged with change, then it doesn't have the same level of impact. So I need to talk and be able to communicate this to, let's say, the coaches. So when the coaches are sitting down and going, okay, we've delivered, for the sake of this, we've delivered Nick's theories or the R90 technique into the athletes. So we know that they're aware of sleeping in cycles. We've got their circadian rhythm information, awareness up, chronotypes, we understand. So when we're looking at the whole season, these are all our objectives and goals. And one thing we would like to do is make sure that with any 24-hour or 48-hour period, is that we want to be able to release at least 5 cycles, 5 sleep cycles to the athlete. Because we know that 5 90-minute cycles equals 7.5 hours, and we know that's a good, healthy percentage in any 24-hour period. What we also know is they're unlikely to get it all in one block. So this is what we plan for: 35 cycles in any 7 days, 365 days of the year. Right. As like in everybody's world, it comes down like the next 7 days in front of us, because we can't control everything. So when the coach then looks at the next 7 days, somebody's changed this and the timing of that event's changed, we've got injuries with certain people, all sorts of factors, and we're having to mess them around a little bit. Like we get ill as well and have flus and viruses and little things like that. So we look at the next 7 days. He looks at the schedule and goes, right, I can see 35 cycles. I can see 3 back-to-back 90s on that night, balanced with a 30-minute there, a 20-minute early evening, as long as it's within these natural 3 sleep periods. I can see we're going to be under pressure there, so they won't make them sleep there, but we'll put one in there. So how many cycles have I got this week if I was doing it as a coach? And I look at it and I go, I can get 30 90-minute cycles, most of them back-to-back, but I've also balanced that with maybe 5 20 or 90-minute ones between midday or early evening, the other 2 natural sleep periods. So I'm comfortable with that, very comfortable. So when I deliver that schedule to the athletes, I know that's what they can do. And I can show them that it's a 35 cycle week, guys, but it might be a little bit heavy on the controlled periods, midday and evening. So go out there, and it's now down to the athlete whether they want to achieve it. And whereas prior to this conversation, Adam, you just go, here's the schedule, recover when you can. And so it starts to re-educate, it starts to give the coach, it starts to give the doctor, the sports science people, the manager, and everybody to sort of, that they're able to redefine their approach while it's happening in front of them. They don't need to keep coming and asking me, what do we do when this happens? It's just a dynamic mental and physical recovery process that's in front of them, and they don't get panicked about maybe it's a 28 cycle week because it's intense. Maybe it's going to drop down to here because it's intense. Maybe we're going to have to look at shifting our training schedules a tiny little bit because, we've got so many PM chronotypes in our group that we want to be careful because we've got a hell of a lot of daytime games coming up. Now, you just wouldn't have that conversation. It's in very early stages now, but that's the level. So it really is, suddenly they just become so much more dynamic about the conversation. And I can talk for Britain, can't I? I can talk for the world because it's a very passionate subject. But I can tell you, you could do something within your own organisation, because I did it at a grammar school recently. So I had 900 pupils in a big conference hall, and they're all about 16 or 17 years of age. 15, 16, 17 years of age. And so in the steep moved into full adulthood, where you're looking at, this 7.5, 8 hours type period becoming your norm or less. So there was always a danger that a lot of people in that room wouldn't be able to answer this question. So I showed them two descriptives of a morning and a nighttime genetic chronotype. You like breakfast, you don't like breakfast. You want to get up and run around like a nut, you don't. You like staying up. So just very simple characteristic descriptions. And so I asked the room, and they will have not heard of chronotypes, not heard of morning or owls or anything at all. Anybody identifies with that, and I thought it would be really lightweight. But I tell you what, 30% of the room, their arm just shot up. There's no thought thinking about it or just going, oh, I'm not quite sure. And some people didn't answer. 30% of the room, hand went straight up, you're a morning chronotype. Oh, yes. So they put their hands down, and I thought, what's going to happen now? So can I assume the rest of you are nighttime chronotypes, or you don't know? And the whole of the rest of the room, their hand went straight up, saying they're a nighttime chronotype. And the teachers and head teachers and staff who were all sat in the room at the same time, just absolutely their mouths dropped open, because they suddenly realized that this may not be a very, very significant thing that's been opened up. But the fact that they know now that those pupils, over 60% of the pupils in that room, clearly identify with that characteristic. So if they're sitting in an exam at 9 a.m. in the morning, only 30% of the pupils in that exam will be morning chronotypes who are up and ready to attack this exam. The rest of them are going to take more time and struggle with it because it's not the right time of day. If they just shifted it by half an hour, or shifted it by an hour, or educated all of those pre-M chronotypes to get dawn-wake simulators into their lives so they get woken up with natural daylight, to get the serotonin levels up, that they've got daylight lamps in the actual exam room, so that it's helping these PM chronotypes get their levels up so they can be as proactive as the morning types. And the same applies in the afternoon. You've got to help the morning chronotypes because the PM chronotypes are coming to life. And suddenly, you don't have to change structure and schedules that are really difficult to change. But as soon as you become aware of it, suddenly everybody's starting to think the next opportunity we get, we're going to do this. And the next opportunity we do that, we're going to do that. And subtly the teachers, because it also affects them, started to make these little tiny changes. And as a result of it, maybe how many pupils pass their exams or at what level starts to creep up. Maybe there is less absenteeism at school. All of these little factors, because they become aware of it. And these young kids, starting out in life, absolutely loved it because they could see the impact I just had on their peers, their teachers, and just going, wow, we could make some changes here, couldn't we? Yeah. Because it had helped me. Brilliant. Now, that was nothing to do with sleep, Adam. It was nothing to do with sleep. It was just a wonderful bit of awareness that should have been around tens of decades ago.
To your point, what I will say is it takes a body of then professionals to be willing to make the next step, to be willing to change, and whether it's organizationally or influence or handhold the facilitation of those things. And I think that's hard sometimes. That's scary for people to change what is otherwise status quo, but much needed.
It is hard, but I think that's, the point you've been emphasizing along the route is that what, in that particular example, everybody in the room knew is that one of the first things is if they just told every parent to buy the pupil, to buy themselves the book, for example, to read the book, to impact it on family life, to impact it on their children, that'll bring everybody in the environment together. That'll hopefully bring that pupil to the school in a better way. And it's all practical stuff. They haven't got to go invest in anything. The teachers themselves get the book, they read it. I mean, like you've been described, they read it, they start to make some practical little changes in their own life. They start to bring it into the conversation in the school, so they don't just talk the same way all the time. They're just going, right, we're going out to do some exercise, which is a great tech break. It's a great tech break. We're going out and get a bit more, we're going to increase our blue light, get some exercise, going to control this. What they do is, rather than changing the curriculum, rather than changing everything, they just can be a bit more proactive. And it becomes part of the conversation rather than not part of the conversation. And so everybody gets engaged without actually having to do anything.
I think that's, and that in itself is what is needed. And it's, I found your book to be the both most comprehensive and the most applied sort of aspects of strategies that, whether you're a pilot, you're a surgeon, you're a high performance athlete, you can begin to have that conversation, with yourself, and then to investigate the various key sleep recovery indicators, and then starting to find what works best for you. And like you said, it's not technologically driven necessarily. It's small behavior changes that anybody could make at a very low cost, low sort of expense standpoint to make meaningful changes on their performance. So, and the book, Sleep, The Myth of 8 Hours, The Power of Naps, and the New Plan to Recharge Your Body and Mind, on Amazon. It's pretty cheap too. It's for what one might spend on a latte or two, you can pick something up that will have meaningful impact for ultimately, hopefully the rest of your life if you take it seriously.
Yeah, it never stops. I think that's one of the most important things to emphasize to everybody is that, once they've got that awareness level up and realize there's lots of things they're doing which are actually right, but they didn't know about it. There are ways that they can just make subtle changes. They don't have to tell everybody in their world they've got to change their routines to suit them. It doesn't work like that, but you'll start finding your way through it. And along that route, every year, every month, every quarter, every season that comes along, any little opportunity for you just to put little things in place that were not there before just keeps aggregating up. Every year, as you keep going through it, every time something changes, the impact will be far less on you. So it's not a read that book, make that change, that's it at all. It inspires you just to go looking for stop worrying about sleep, because that is the goal. If I can get somebody along that pathway to stop worrying about it and take a different approach to it, and get more control over it and be more active with it, that is the biggest barrier to change, is to stop worrying about it.
So lastly, Nick, where, and your Twitter, your social media, Twitter handle, Sports Sleep Coach, what's the best way the audience can engage with you or find some of your materials or resources or websites? What's the best way they could reach you and find out more information about the great work that you do and the book?
They could listen to your podcast, Aaron. But maybe they already are.
Hopefully.
Refer it on. I think obviously the easiest thing to do is to simply come into sportsleepcoach.com. So sleepcoach.com. That comes directly into me and my small team, and Jess, who handles all our content and social media. And so if they had any questions, if they had any observations, or like to know anything at all, then bang that question in via the website through the contact page, or you can just email us at direct at info@sportsleepcoach.com. But the one that I suppose is familiar to a lot of people is simply at Sports Sleep Coach on Twitter. We have a very a broad range of people who we interact with on Twitter. We're always posting good free content. We're actually in the middle of a 7 days, 7 tips to change your life, and we're doing that this week. So they can come in via there and gather whatever information we've got. We can operate on an international basis because a lot of the coaching and consultation services that we've got can be done virtually all over the world, as they are, and we're expanding, those services all the time. But just encourage people to not be frightened, to not think that they won't be able to achieve anything. You just make that first step, get the book. If they don't like reading, then it's on an audible.com, so they can listen to me talking for 6 hours if that suits you. But they can get MP3, they can listen the book. And I honestly can tell everybody, because this is why we're having one of these conversations, is when they read the book, it doesn't mean to say that's it. Nearly everybody who reads the book becomes inspired to sort of go, oh my God, I've just got to get into this. I've just got to do these things now. And that's because they really feel, inspired to make some changes. So that's a good place to start if they get hold of it. And wherever your listeners are in the world, we're up to 13 countries now. So pretty much China, Japan, Korea, Germany, Arabic, Spain, Italian, you name it, and the US, Germany. It's actually going to be published in the US in early 2018. So available on the high street. So those are the places to go.
Perfect. Yeah. And I think to put a bow tie on this, while certainly a global reach and publications in a variety of different languages and cultures and societies, the one commonality between all of us is we're human and we all need to sleep. And the importance of it, despite cultural differences, is we all still need to find better ways of getting changing the narrative around sleep and focusing on getting better sleep, essentially at it. My guest today, Nick Littlehales, thank you so much for coming on the Decoding Excellence show and sharing some of your wisdoms and your experiences. And I'll make sure I include your social media and the website and your resources in the show notes here today. But thanks again so much. I really, really appreciate the great information that you've been willing to share with the audience today.
Thank you very much. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Hope you got what you want, Adam.
Thank you. And until next time, take care. I want to thank my guest today, Nick Littlehales, for coming on the Decoding Excellence show. I hope that you, the listener, happen to take away some actionable information from this show, things you can immediately start to apply to better improve your sleep, education that you can provide to your student athletes for them to perform in their evening routines, to optimize their recovery, their regeneration, their ability to go from bout to bout, training session to training session, and deliver an excellent performance and mastery at their performance craft. If you enjoyed any of the information shared, the guest, the materials before, during, or after, please share this show on your favorite social media of choice. As always, this show originated around the idea of truly trying to distill, understand, and decode what goes into excellent performers. So like always, thank you for tuning in to the Decoding Excellence show. And until next time, thank you.